Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at popular server applications. Let's get started. What is a server? A server is something that provides client services. The simplest example is a web server, and that's the one we'll start with here. We'll start with Apache, under Web Server Applications. So before I read this text or go through that, let's look at this for a moment. We have a user with a computer, connected to the internet, here represented by a cloud. The Apache host is a server also connected to the internet. Now this could be a dedicated host inside of a data center, or it could be another user's computer that's also connected to the internet. On this Apache host, Apache has been installed. Apache is a free and open source web server and it's listening on a port, which means it's listening for incoming connections. Typically over port 80 or 443. When it receives those connections that are usually from a web browser, it then serves the content that it has configured to serve for a website. So a developer will place files on the Apache host. The Apache host will host those files or serve them as web content for incoming web requests. So about Apache, Apache is a highly popular, free and open source web server service application. It permits web content to be served by the host and may use compiled modules to extend the core functionality of the service. It will have modules for various functionality. It will have modules for various development languages, things like that. Another popular web server application is Nginx. Nginx is a web server that can also be used for reverse proxy, load balancing, mail proxy, and HTTP caching. So proxying means it can proxy requests for something else. Load balancing, which is our example here, means that it can balance incoming requests. So here's the internet and all of these requests for web content are coming into this Nginx host here. It can then balance those requests between backend hosts. Here we have another Nginx host representative as a backend web host, and an Apache host here as a backend web host. And of course, you're not limited to two, you could have dozens if you liked, but all of the requests come in through the load balancer and then are distributed out to the backend hosts. That is load balancing in essence. Nginx is open source. However, there are some closed source and proprietary components available for Nginx that extend its functionality. Here we have a couple of database server applications. We'll start with MySQL. MySQL is an open source relational database management system together with Linux, Apache and PHP, Perl, and Python. It makes up the popular LAMP stack used for deploying websites. So LAMP stacks aren't as popular now as they once were, but it was a way to have a free, easy open source web stack, where you would have Linux as your operating system, Apache would be running as a web server, MySQL was installed for the database backend for web content, and then PHP, Perl, or Python or all three were the development languages used for the web content on that host. MySQL is used by many database-driven web applications, such as WordPress, and many websites, such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube all use MySQL as their backend. An alternative to MySQL is MariaDB. MariaDB is a community-developed fork of MySQL. LibreOffice was a fork or a parallel project with OpenOffice. So too is MariaDB with MySQL. The developers took the open-source MySQL code and created a parallel project called MariaDB. The developer's intent for MariaDB is to maintain a high level of compatibility between MariaDB and MySQL, while remaining free and open source software. MariaDB claims some performance optimizations for speed improvements compared to MySQL, and it is a powerful and feature-rich alternative. Incidentally, each version of MariaDB is intended to exactly match the corresponding version of MySQL, and compatibility issues are typically well documented. For the most part, anywhere you could use MySQL, you could use MariaDB. In terms of file sharing applications, we have Samba here. Samba is an open-source file sharing software for Linux that permits file sharing with Windows clients through native connectivity using the Common Internet File System or CIFS. So where you see Samba typically used is on a local network. You don't typically share files over the internet with Samba. That's not really what it's designed for. If you have a small office and everyone has a computer and you're all working on some files and you want to be able to sort of share them and have them distributed, you could set up a Samba server to hold all those files, and then people would just connect sort of locally to review and edit those files. Samba performs file and print services, authentication and authorization, name resolution, and service announcement. The most common use case is to function as a file server or as a client to connect to a Windows file server. And really that was the inception of Samba, as a way for Linux computers to be able to connect and share files with Windows computers. Next we have NFS. NFS, or Network File System, is a distributed file system protocol. So it's not an application so much as it is a protocol, permitting client hosts to access files and directories over the network as local storage. So let me write that down a little bit. Let's say I wanted to set up NFS on my Ubuntu host here. I have a hard disk, and if I take a look, I have this disk here, dev SDA8. It is a 420 GB disk and I'm using approximately 2% of it. I could have another disk. I could partition this disk differently, which is to configure how it's used differently, and I can then export it over my local file system. That is the computers on the same network that I'm on as an NFS export. Other computers on the network could then attach to that NFS export and use it as if it was their own hard disk on their own computer. So use cases for this includes shared documents and files and common web application libraries, or even home directories. If you imagine for a moment, we have a lot of Apache servers and they're all serving the same content. NFS could be used to distribute that content. Next, we have private cloud applications, starting with OwnCloud. OwnCloud is a client-server suite of applications for creating and using file hosting services. The functionality of OwnCloud is similar to Dropbox. However, your files are stored on your own connected hardware. So remember, in our cloud lesson, we were talking about how the cloud is this collection of data centers, and you've got regions, and you've got availability zones, that is the AWS Enterprise Cloud. You can create your own small cloud using an application like OwnCloud. You could have a series of hosts connected to the internet. You would install OwnCloud as a server on these hosts on your local desktop or laptop. You would install OwnCloud as a client, and then you could use it similar to how you would use Box or Dropbox. OwnCloud supports extensions to permit online document editing as well as calendar and context synchronization. While commercial support is available, the server edition of OwnCloud is open source and free. An alternative to OwnCloud is Nextcloud. The original developer of OwnCloud forked OwnCloud to create Nextcloud, and remember, a fork is simply taking the source code and creating a parallel project. And that developer continues to actively develop Nextcloud with the original members of the OwnCloud team. While OwnCloud Core is open source, the enterprise features, are not. So Nextcloud maintains that all features are open source. In terms of basic functionality, there are a few differences between OwnCloud and Nextcloud. So really we're getting into kind of a philosophical difference between free and open sourced and closed and proprietary. What I mean by that is the forks tend to go from being something that is sort of open sourced with some closed source enterprise support, to something that is completely open source, such as MySQL to MariaDB, OwnCloud to Nextcloud, etc. And so it's a philosophical difference that we'll talk about this after upcoming lesson. For now, this lesson on server applications is complete. If you are new, please subscribe my YouTube channel, like, share and comment. Thanks for watching.